Happy to have you on the show, and it's nice to finally get to talk to someone about, like, I suppose, kids and kids' well-being and kids' mental health. And it's funny because neither of us are parents, but we're very concerned about it and we're very interested in it. Why are you actually, just out of curiosity, what's the draw? Like, then where's the passion coming from? Because not being a parent, you would think, okay.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it really comes from the fact that it's a very personal journey that I've had. So I grew up as an anxious child, and I've done years of work, and I've spent a lot of time finding different tools that I find help me with my anxiety. And all I could think is that if I could save, like, I have 3 beautiful nieces, I have friends who have beautiful children. If I could just help any of them better manage any anxiety that they're feeling, to sort of shortcut that, like, how wonderful would that be? And so it's one of those things where I believe in doing stuff that helps yourself, but also can help others, is probably one of the most meaningful things you can do in your life, right? So I'm like, it has deep meaning to me. It's something that when I practice it and I keep it top of mind, I'm living my best self. And if I can encourage and get parents and kids to do the same thing, I'm like, I think we can change the world as far as the way we think. And so I truly believe that it's a progress, like, it's a progression. I think when I was a kid, there wasn't much in the way of talking about emotions or the way that thoughts impact our sort of feelings and behaviors. And so I just think if we could teach kids at a young age to understand it the same way that we do, like, a triangle has 3 sides, that thoughts are just thoughts, we could really shift how much suffering there is, unnecessary suffering, I'll say, because there's so much worry and so much anxiety in the world that's just not needed. And so that was a big driver for me to want to create this book that would help young ones. And I always talk about it as a household, because I think when you think about anxiety, when parents have anxiety, that trickles, like, kids can feel that. They sense they're feeling and sensing beings, right? We all are. So when somebody else is anxious, we talk about how that's contagious. And on the same side of that, calmness is contagious. And so the book is really about reminding us so I have this line: I can learn to be still and be present at will. My worries will shrink. I'll just stop and think. A thought is a thought. It's not me. It's just not. And so there's just so much truth to that, like, we just need to remember when we're feeling overwhelmed to, like, take a deep breath, calm the nervous system, be present, get grounded. And all of that, those racing thoughts really do slow down. And so I just feel like I've had to learn it through a lot of working through meditation and the hard way. I keep saying, sort of the ongoing battle to get there. But there's so many things that we learned as kids that just stuck with us. And so my goal is, by teaching this lesson at a younger age, that it just sticks with them and that they can bypass that.
Yeah. You're bringing up a subject of the kind of culture we have of not changing our kind of structure of our educational system for whatever reason. There may be loads of really good reasons why we haven't done that yet, but not really familiar with them. And I don't really understand why it's so difficult to address something that is essentially the foundation of everything that comes after it. Like, when you think about mental health, I mean, you'll be forgiven for thinking it's something that happens that you need to deal with later on in life. But the more and more I investigate it and I talk to people, it starts at the very beginning. It starts during childhood, during the developmental years, when we're just trying to figure out who we are and what life is all about. And I'm not sure if it was you that told me this or if it was someone else, because I've been speaking with quite a few experts in this area lately. But the thing that I remember quite vividly now is that someone told me that our brains don't stop developing until we're about 25 or 26. And once that's happened, we are a much more complex organism. We have a much more complex way of understanding things. And so we can kind of look at nuances of communication. But until then, especially very early on, we rely on language because language is very direct and very easy to understand. And so, we need to be really careful about the things that we say around young people. Otherwise, it really helps them to build maybe the wrong idea of who they are and their identity. And I suffered from that. And I think you might have suffered from that. And other people have suffered from that, especially people who have like chronic anxiety, because I think it's stemming from, the things that we learned when we were younger. Maybe perhaps one of our parents said something like, oh, you'll never amount to much, or you're such a nuisance, or, those kinds of things. And it might seem harmless, but it's not.
You're absolutely right. And I think as a child, it can be hundreds of positive statements, and one teacher or one voice can really sharply damage that self-esteem. And so I know when we talked last, I mentioned that for me, it was important. In the book, I talk about having positive affirmations, and I have I am statements. And I know we were chatting, and to me, I'm like, I really want to try to instill some of that confidence intrinsically. So how do they have that self-awareness and self-confidence, so that when they hear things, if a teacher says they're stupid, which is awful, and I hope never happens, but there are times where they come up against this type of bullying and these types of statements that can stick. And like you said, they become a story that repeated over and over again. And so with the positive affirmations, I just really wanted kids to start to think about those positive I am statements. I am smart. I am kind. I am brave. So that they have some of that resilience when they hear statements that just don't feel like they align with what they truly believe as who they are. And so I know a lot when I was growing up, and I'm sure when you were growing up, and it is awesome to get praise. I think it's fantastic. And I obviously encouraging your child, but there's a lot of value in helping them see their value from their own lens. And so I think just trying to shift that from having this feeling that you need to have exterior feedback that makes you feel better versus having this sort of confidence that's coming from the inside out, I think helps us build resilience so that, like I said, we can sort of brush off those negative statements when we hear them because we just know they're not true.
Yes. And by the way, I was joking that it does happen when teachers or people, when you're people who are supposed to take care of you and guide you, and they do I had some terrible teachers when I was growing up. I don't know about you, but they were just genuinely really unhappy with their job. You could tell. But such is life, I guess. I think you're always going to have that, especially in the system that we have today. But it's a question of how much exposure are we really giving our children to the stuff that matters the most. And books like yours, which is why I wanted to talk to you, seem to be a really essential part of that mix. So, but when it comes to I wanted to ask you something. How was your childhood growing up, and are there things that you look back at now when you kind of think that were maybe inspiring to you to actually do something like this? Was that one of the driving forces?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always a super creative child. I think that has come through in my career. So I work in marketing, I air quote day job, because I also love the idea. I want to say I'm a writer, I'm a slash marketer,
you can now.
slash, we can be so many things. We don't need to be all one thing. And so, but I will say that I have been creative from a young age, and expression has been important to me my whole life. And so what I have made a career out of is creating meaningful dialogues through brand engagement. And so to me, when I hear complex concepts and I try to think about how we can visualize them or how can we make something tangible, in particular, this big idea of introducing kids that basically thoughts are things, and that there's the opportunity for us to get curious and look at thoughts almost like you would hold an object in your hand. Like, how do you create that space to recognize that a thought can be looked at as separate to you? Because I know when I was growing up, it just felt like, thoughts are just happening, hundreds and thousands of thoughts a day, and you're just sort of letting them wash you over. And yes, I know parents can intervene and say okay, you're worrying too much about that. But I'm like, how do you let kids understand from their own perspective that they need to observe and get curious about thoughts that they're having? And so I really just wanted to help empower them to be able to do that. And so when they do have a negative thought, one that's not very helpful, that they have some tools to be able to start to get curious about that. And so in the book, a big one that I wanted to include, because this idea that thoughts are things, I'm like, that's a great concept, but how do you ground it into something practical? Because the main refrain in the book is a thought is a thought. It's not me, it's just not, which is about, again, like I said, recognizing that when thoughts come in, you shouldn't just accept them as face value and let them sort of observe and fall into your heart. If, for example, a teacher says that you're not very smart, like, you don't want that to be, you want to filter, you want to be able to say, I hear that,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with that, I'm going to think about this a different way. And so I just want them to be able to have that skill set. And so just by starting to recognize that, like, basically thoughts are just thoughts, they aren't who you are, was the main message I wanted to get across. But then I was like, well, how do I make that helpful? And so I included a thought exercise in the book, which I think these questions are good. And I will say I use them because they're good at any age to remember. The first one is, what is a thought that you're having? So just like taking a moment to even just look at the thought, right? Think about what you're thinking about. How does a thought make you feel? And so I think that's something, again, when we were young, there wasn't a lot of talk about combining or like talking about like, how does that thought connect in your body? Like, what emotions is that bringing up for you? We just weren't talking about those types of layers of the complexity of thinking and emotions and thoughts. And so I wanted to help connect that human connection piece to being like, how do I feel in my body? What is the emotion that's connected to this thought? And then the third question is, do you know if that thought is true? And now this is the one where I really think we can get that shifting, because if there's any introduction of any other way that we can not 100% know that that thought's true, like maybe we really think it is, but if we can just think maybe there's like a 1% chance that thought's not true, then we open up the door to more possibilities of how we can look at that thought. And so then the last question I have, which is this is where we really want to do that shifting, is if you could choose another thought, one that might make you feel better, what would it be? So I want to put this a bit into some tangible examples, because I know it's a big concept. And so perhaps a kid has a thought, they waved at their friend across the playground kid didn't wave back. Their thought is, my friend doesn't like me. And so how does that thought make you feel? Well, it makes you feel pretty bad. You're feeling sad. Maybe maybe your body is feeling like maybe you're teary, maybe you're having a functional body response to that thought that my friend doesn't like me. So how do you know if that thought is true? So I don't know. So you start asking them, like, how do you know that's true? Well, they didn't wave. Well, is there any other possible like thought that could be true or possible in this scenario? And so that might mean something as simple as, they didn't see me. And when you think about the difference of they don't like me and they didn't see me, there is a very different energy to those two phrases. When your friend doesn't see you, that doesn't hurt your heart the way that thinking that they don't like you does. And so what I want to do is just encourage them to be able to sort of identify that maybe there's another reason for this. And I again will go back to the fact that even as an adult, there's so much power in recognizing that maybe the thought you're having about